It's time for a manga review with this one here. Let's do a manga review on Volume 6 of Inuyasha manga for the first time, even though I have been doing my manga review on the 5th volume of Inuyasha, especially was to my previous manga reviews that I have been recently reviewing in the past, even since yesterday. So this is going to take the cake when it comes to doing a manga review on Inuyasha Volume 6, which is the biggest thing is now I'm going to do this one as well, because I'm going to give it into in-depth and going into detail, especially for this one as well, because this has got me thinking, though. I haven't thought of doing this one until now. This is going to take the good as how I'm going to give this with a good reputation feeling when it comes to giving a little summary analysis basically for Inuyasha Volume 6. So let's do this. Hey guys, this is RuRoniK95 here, and it's time for a manga review video once again. This time because I'm going to be reviewing another volume from another manga series that I'm still currently reviewing and giving in analysis and little plot point summary of how it's basically different before the anime as well. And yeah, it's been even though I have been reading about 12 volumes, had to reread the 12 volumes of the Inuyasha manga as well, from what I understand as well. So today, we're going to be doing a manga review on Inuyasha Volume 6 for today's manga review video. Because I have another volume where this takes place where it's left off after Volume 5. Even though I have been reviewing all 5 volumes of the Inuyasha manga yesterday, but this should definitely take the cake, from what I understand, which I haven't done before until now. So, in Chapter 1 of Volume 6 of Inuyasha, or it takes place where it's left off of where Kikyo wanted to shoot Inuyasha with a bow and arrow, and this time she won't miss. During the betrayal is how it goes, when Lady Kaede has found the unconscious body of Kagome, because Kagome's soul is in Kikyo's body as well, which is not in a good way. When Kikyo shoots the arrow, Inuyasha pulls out the sword, so he has to fight off use his Tetsaiga. So he uses the Fang of Steel Tetsaiga technique to defeat Kikyo's arrow, as how this goes. How he has to put the Tetsaiga down, which Kikyo could have fallen to near death as well, just because she's reincarnating from the dead, as how this progresses. Yeah. Take notice on this one as well, which I understand as well. Because she thought it was some trickery, especially of what Inuyasha did with Kikyo in the past, especially of how she was making a fool of herself, as what she did in the past, particularly about how ripping the Shikon jewel from as well, especially if Kikyo is half human, at least as well. That's what she said to Inuyasha in the manga, especially of how in the past days as well, as she becomes human, particularly as how they wanted to live their lives together, but especially of how she was an innocent fool of how this happened. What you notice to take note on this part in this chapter of the manga is how this progresses as well. And this wasn't long, basically how this has got to him as well. But Lady Kaede who has the eye patch in the eye, told Inuyasha to get away from Kikyo when Kikyo had the battle against Inuyasha, especially of how her body could not rest even though she has been died from the very beginning, as how her body was dragged back to life by the ogre's trick, as how like she thought she was being possessed or something, especially of how the chaos and the carnage goes as well, of how you take note of this as well. And from one other reason is that Inuyasha could have understood if he killed either Kikyo, but Kagome's soul is in Kikyo's body as well. And yep, they all know that Kikyo's body has Kagome's soul in it. But Inuyasha couldn't realize Kagome's soul is in Kikyo's body as well. But then that's how Kagome's soul went back to Kagome's body after, from the point out, which I think this is how it happened, is how this progresses as well. After Kikyo has fallen in the water, during the chaos and the carnage, is how this goes as well. Yeah. And if they could have, which is almost in a serious way as how this goes, particularly, yeah, because Kikyo's body has Kagome's soul in it, which is ripped from Kikyo's body, which is transferred back to Kagome, which is almost in a serious possible thing. But although Kikyo still moves after Kagome's soul was out of Kikyo's body as well, because if the soul is left, because when Lady Kaede told Inuyasha there's no more than Kikyo's hatred, as how this progresses, of how Demon Urasu said it was ironic, thought it was ironic, and how such a vengeful demoness, as how, but then this basically how Kikyo must got away to the death, but then this basically how when Inuyasha tells Kikyo, who has Kagome's soul, wanted to go back inside Kagome especially, and that's how particularly how this happens. Basically, she knows that if her soul goes back into Kagome, particularly, and that's how that she thought she could kill Inuyasha, but then Inuyasha has dropped Kikyo, which she fell into the water, basically, of how what you see in this one, because he would have noticed as well. Yeah. When Inuyasha came to see how Kagome is doing as well, and this is particularly how this happens, she hasn't been awakened until she has been recovered from after she was like being tortured by those nightmares, but then she awakened, and now her soul is back in Kagome, of how she knew it was a dream, basically, when she had problems on her math test, especially in her present day as well, of how Inuyasha thought that Kikyo died, but that wasn't long until Kikyo has coming out of the water, and then she walks off into the destroyed battlefield war area, where she was alive because she's reincarnated from the dead as well, than any mankind has ever gotten before. When Inuyasha would have had apologized of how to Kagome about how that if there's something weird happened, especially of how if they could have he could have misunderstood especially of how that Inuyasha thought he was looking at Kagome, particularly of how the moments goes, particularly as how it's not just any reincarnation as well. Which is in chapter 2. In chapter 3, we get to the introduction to Miroku, who is a perverted Buddhist monk as well, of how he basically could have noticed something of how something happened 3 months after the princess's collapse. If the medicine could have helped, of how it could recover to save her life, especially of how he has been raised for Buddha as well, particularly if something has matters as how this happened, basically, as how until how it was like in disguise, but it was a demon in a true form out of it as well. So Miroku has to fight off the demon beast in this part of the manga. Take notice on this one as well. Yep. And the same thing is how they understand of how they didn't know if they could understand if Miroku could fight off the demons, but the princess was still alive after being recovered as well. Meanwhile, Inuyasha, Shippo, and Kagome are on their journey of how something happened. If they could have understand of how he keeps on daydreaming of how he could have forgotten about Kikyo as how this happened. Meanwhile, somewhere else, somebody who found the prophet of the Shikon Jewel Shard of how his luck happened until he notices visitors, until how he notices if he could have noticed of how this happens. Inuyasha is not tempted when Kagome's in the hot spring part is how this happens. Basically of how because Kagome is not no warrior shrine like Kikyo, especially of how this could have understand as well. Especially of how they could have known. When Shippo knows of how something happened, if he could have understand as well. Especially until Kagome was enjoying the hot spring until she heard something strange. But Inuyasha could have noticed that it was something he might have got her as well. But Miroku noticed how pity he sees, and then the master who is part of Miroku always has appeared as well. Meanwhile, the next day we see where if they could have understand as how they used, particularly of how they would have used something to kill off the demons. In chapter 4 in this manga, if they could have noticed of how they could understand of how they notice a transformation goes of how this starts the battle as well, because Inuyasha could have known, and that's how Kagome wanted to know if Inuyasha's alright, but she falls off, but then landed on the bike where Miroku is, because she doesn't know who is he, because Miroku is basically who serves Buddha and do no creature harm, of how if he has the Shikon Jewel Shard, especially, and Inuyasha notices something as how if he could understand, especially in this chapter. But then he has the jewel as well when he has to fight against Inuyasha basically. But it was misunderstood happened as well. In this part of the manga is now you notice of how that Buddha, like Miroku is there because she knew that he stole on Kagome's bike. If they could have noticed about the Shikon jewel, and then they had to get after him. Meanwhile, somewhere else in the village, he came back because Miroku has the girls in the village when he came back on there. But this wasn't long until Kagome, Shippo, and Inuyasha arrived in the village. of how they, from out of nowhere, as how this happens. As how they wanted to know if her bike is there, and then Inuyasha thought it was a thief who's stolen a bicycle, but it's actually Moroku. Of how the settlement of how he could have basically know as how this happened, as basically how he could have thought if Moroku has stolen Kagome's bike as well. And then that's how the duel battle between Moroku and Inuyasha, when he has prepared the Tetsaiga as well. In chapter 5 of the manga, Inuyasha doesn't know if that Buddhist person is, but then Moroku introduces himself, especially of how to exorcise a demon, as how this basically will, because he has the Shikon jewel, basically. Especially when Inuyasha has the battle fight between him and Moroku, especially in this part that you noticed as well. And the scene is how this basically goes down in the progress, as how when he has the hand, especially to fight off the demon, but Inuyasha uses the Tetsaiga as the battle goes on, is how this goes. In the void is how he could have devoured the demon as well, which is like a black hole, as how Moroku's powers from his hand, where he fights the demons with, as how he has the capability. And that was long until Kagome arrived, but then she had to stop the Moroku from battling Inuyasha, as how he was not even that bad. In the 6th chapter, how she leapt on, Inuyasha could have known if Moroku is always there in this, if he's unconscious, because he could have, but then Moroku tells them to calm themselves down. If he could explain of how he gathers the jewel of the four souls of any certain demon, which is called Naraku, which is basically the bottomless chasm in his hand, which is cut by the curse from Naraku, and he knows of what Naraku is as well. If in the gathering of how the origins of how this goes about Naraku has, especially in the final confrontation, is that Naraku appeared as a beautiful woman with her Moroku's grandfathers possessed incredible spiritual powers, especially from what his grandfather had a lot to do, especially in is how the carnage goes. If how this means he thought he was going to die, but he has capable to live without dying, as how especially it's killed a priestess, which is basically took the form and killed Kikyo 50 years ago. Inuyasha knew it might have been Naraku, as how he could have realized if he could figure out about how this all happened, especially if how Nara snaring at Inuyasha and Kikyo with its lies, especially the hatred it has, how it has got to him. If he could have gathered these shards, if they wanted to know if they could know about Naraku, especially in this part, when how they were working themselves together as how they could fight off Naraku, especially how, because despite that Moroku is a monk, especially how this goes, as how in this gathers how this goes to base the battle on the comrades, is how this goes. It's how in the battle until some demons appeared when those warriors noticed, which they were killed by these demons in the war field, as how this goes. In chapter 7, the monster within, they could have figured out of how Moroku is so dependable about the Shikon jewel, as how when Inuyasha notices something about somebody's just a normal person, then took off. But when she told Inuyasha basically how there were some demons had defeated those warriors in a destroyed battlefield war area zone, until this leads to the shrine, especially of how the nobility, when Moroku has noticed something about how there was some maiden, how she came from nowhere, as how the nobility of someone is there, about how when Inuyasha arrived, that this guy was only a painter, because it was basically thought it was stink of human blood and liver, which Inuyasha thought it was some monster, but this guy is actually a painter. Yeah, because the human character is actually a painter. Oh, I didn't notice. But it was actually a monster, a demon in disguise, which Inuyasha has to fight against. But then he has to come at him as well. So he has to defeat the monster with his Tetsaiga, especially what you see in this one as well. When Inuyasha has to fight this creature, though, there was a lot of demon blood everywhere of how he gathers, of how he sees. The night has come, Moroku appears, of how there was demons coming, especially, of how that he would save the young maiden girl, as how just in case if there's demons coming, if he could have known of how how the evening comes. There were stands of armies of ogres. In chapter 8, this woman turns out basically how she notices something where this guy thought she looked like an ogress as well. And then he was basically manipulating an ogre, so he might have been thinking something might have possessed him, as how this goes, as how they would have been spoken by when every night servant demons appears, especially in this chapter in the manga goes, of how it progresses, you take notice on Inuyasha as well. So the guy noticed if the princess was there, but she was being possessed by the monsters. He notices something, but then he told Shippo if the princess was there, that he thought Shippo was with that dog with Inuyasha, especially of how the chaos goes in this built area, as how in the night there was aurora of demons. What Inuyasha and Kagome and Moroku notices that it might have been basically the paintings as how it causes the destruction. In chapter 9, they notice of how he created those demons, especially with the paintings, especially in Inuyasha, especially of how if he could have figured out basically if Inuyasha could fight off these aurora demon monsters in this manga, as how they basically could have especially what Inuyasha and Moroku has to fight off those monsters, especially of how this artist guy thought this ogre's being stolen basically, but Moroku has to use his hand power to fight off those monsters, which sucks into the hand how it'll fight off those monsters basically just to save every person's life as well. And that's how it was when he was getting away. But then Inuyasha could figure out where's the Shikon shard at, especially. But this how could have understand the reason if he could fight off that painter guy who was like a demon in disguise, especially if he could fight off them. But then that's how if he could prepare the battle. In chapter 10, Inuyasha could basically fight off to cut that snake. The stench would knock him out, basically, of how this basically. But he wants to fight off that snake monster in this manga, as how, especially because that painter guy has been creating that one, but it breathes fire almost like a dragon in the process. That's how it goes. But Inuyasha has decided he can pull out the Tetsaiga, that he's basically thought he was been beaten by a human, but he was actually a half demon, basically, despite that he has the Tetsaiga, as how he could basically kill off that the monster, but it bit in the leg, as how it go like a bear trap in it. But then he fights off the monster, basically, of how he wants to fight off if he could have understand why, as how this goes, particularly in this chapter as well. But it was basically he wanted to save the guy's life, but he was made out of ink, so he died in disappearance, which he vanished to his near death, that you see in this one as well. Take notice on this part, you notice as well. If he could have known about this, when Moroku and Kagome arrived, basically of how they noticed it was the ink, the blood-like ink, because it was basically that blood that the artist had spilled, especially that looked like ink. When he was trying to paint the princess, especially, but Moroku thought only one paint with such purity, with such tainted ink, especially of how what he could have realized, of how Moroku could help out if they could. There was no tricks of his eyes as by now, as how when the next day comes, when if there's anybody carrying that thing, as how what they had a lot to do basically, for how he that there is that is how it would have got a lot to do for this, as how more pleasant traveling with Inuyasha and Kagome and Shippo, what Moroku's decision as well. Especially how he's a great fellow, how he could fight off those demons with his hand, with it sucks all the demons away from there. And this leads you to be continued. So that's my good analysis. I'm giving in the little plot point summary of how this takes off after volume 5 of the Inuyasha manga. I mean, the story's a lot more complex. There's a lot more analysis to go through as well, because that's given in the point. The story's great because it's a lot more historical thing of how serious this goes, especially what you notice in volume 6 of the Inuyasha manga as well, from the looks as where it seems of how it goes as well. And not only that, that the story was very great though. The characters, we got the introduction to Moroku, who is part in the story in the manga as supposing before the anime came out in 2000 as well. Despite though that Inuyasha started as a manga in the 90s. The enjoyment, I find the enjoyment for any good ways, and this is going to be part of the manga recommendations. And overall, I find this one a great way to go into a good analysis of how you're going through this as well. And my score for this, a 10 out of 10, especially for this one as well. So that's going to be it for my manga review on Inuyasha Volume 6 for today, you guys. Thank you for watching, but before we go, here's what I'm going to say for this one. Even though I have been reviewing all 5 volumes of the Inuyasha manga in the past since yesterday, because I have been going into in-depths and plots and summary about the Inuyasha manga as well, because this is how it's given in the point, basically, of how this has got me to a point as how, which is basically how it's part of anyone's manga recommendations if you loved this one as well. Because, this is something what Rumiko Takahashi had a lot to do when she created the Inuyasha manga after she finished working on the final volume of Ranma 1/2 manga. That's why. Hope subscribe for content. My Anime Planet link in the description down below. If you want to check out my Anime Planet, link will be in the description if you want to check out my Anime Planet as well. And also, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as well. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, RuRoniK95. Feel free to join my channel, especially if you're new to my channel as a newcomer. Smack the notifications bell button. Be sure to get notified also as well. And keep it otaku for this manga review, because this is the first time I got to do a manga review on Volume 6 of Inuyasha, because this has gotten to the point, basically, of how I'm giving in there. And one of these days, I might do, like, manga analysis going 6 volumes in one analysis, which I'm going into revisiting after rereading the manga once I get more volumes of the manga at one point. This is RuRoniK95 saying, thank you for watching my video, and I'm glad you liked it. I hope you enjoy it. Hope to see you soon for the next video, and I hope you have a great day. This is RuRoniK95 signing off, and thank you for watching my video, and I will see you soon for more videos.